Hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. If you do like the programming you see here and the musicians and artists I visit with, please be sure and hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel. Sal Solo is an English-born singer and multi-instrumentalist who is best known as the frontman for Classix Nouveaux. Sal began his musical career with the band The News in 1977, releasing one single. He founded the band Classix Nouveaux as part of the New Romantic movement and would be the lead singer from 1979 until the band's breakup in 1985. During that time, the band released three albums along with a slew of singles. In 2021, a remake of Inside Outside appeared, followed by a second single, Fix Your Eyes Up, in 2022. And in 2023 came a new album, Battle Cry. Over the years, there have been several compilations issued. From the period 1984 to 1992, Sal sang in the French space rock band Rockets. After a pilgrimage to San Damiano in Italy, he found a renewed calling in the Roman Catholic faith of his childhood. In 1987, Mr. Solo became active in youth ministry in the UK and carried on that work after relocating to the US in 1999. My guest has released several albums of Christian music in the 90s and in the new millennium. Well, welcome, Sal.
Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Well, take us back to the beginning. Where were you born?
Oh, well, I was born about 20 miles north of London, really. I guess in American terms, we'd call it the suburbs.
Yes.
It was a boring kind of place because um, what we don't get and maybe don't understand so well from over here in America is that England was very much destroyed in World War II. And so they really had a challenge. I mean, I'm deducing this from I'm more interested in history now as an old person than I ever was back in the day. But um, you know, I guess they had to make a decision. Were they going to try and rebuild all of London and the major cities that were destroyed and cramp people together, or instead branch out and do what we Americans call suburbs? And so they call them the new towns. Well, they used to. They're not new anymore, obviously, but they started building a lot of new towns. And the problem with them really was that they built lots of houses, but they didn't really build a lot of facilities. And so, for instance, in the town where I grew up, the only public facility there was a swimming pool. If we
Yeah.
wanted to watch movies, we had to go to the next city.
Is that
And yeah, so people generally left there as soon as they could. Before my time, there was people like Donovan and Rod Argent. I came from either that town or the next one. Then there was maybe people like Bananarama, I believe, might have been from around there.
yeah.
But generally speaking, yeah, if you could leave, then you would.
And you would. Yeah, I talked to a few musicians that grew up right after World War II. And as children, they said, talked about playing in the bombed out buildings there. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Well, not play, I wasn't old enough to play. I wasn't born, but yeah, I think these days on YouTube, of course, you get so many rockumentaries that were never around before because TV channels wouldn't show them.
Yes.
So I've watched a lot of those things too, like Jeff Beck and people from the '60s, Clapton, and where they talk about their growing up, and I find that so fascinating. If I'd have been born 10 years earlier or something, that would have been maybe part of my experience.
Right, right. Did you watch the recent documentary, Zeppelin documentary, how they got started? Did you see that?
I don't know if it's the recent one, but I've watched quite a bit about them because the first concert I ever attended in my life was Led Zeppelin at the Royal Albert Hall.
Okay. You're
And
reading you're reading my mind now. That was one of my questions. There you
yeah,
go.
so much later on,
Yeah.
when I was living in Chicago, my friend Nick Beggs, who used to be in Kajagoogoo, was playing as a session musician with John Paul Jones.
Uh-huh.
And so I went backstage afterwards. And so I said to JPJ, that was my first concert. And he said, was that the time when there was flowers in front or not flowers in front? And I thought, how could he possibly but remember that? I can't remember all the places I played and what they looked like, but he must have a very, very detailed brain if he can go back that far.
Right. Well, the reason I brought that up is you were talking about if you had been born 10 years earlier or what have you. They talked about playing here in Louisville, which is a suburb of Dallas, in 69, I believe it was.
Mm.
And I was too young to go, but I said if I had just been born, again, 10 years before, I could have gone to that concert.
Well, yeah, all these, the famous English blues guys, of course, Jimmy Page is one of them, but in particular, like Peter Green as a young kid, all the big hits by Fleetwood Mac before they had girls in the group.
Right.
Um, and they talk about, I mean, even earlier than that, the Animals, Eric Burden and I'm trying to think of all those names who, when I was growing up, they were kind of like considered has-beens. But
Yeah.
had I been there in the early 60s, actually, one friend of mine in England is Paul Jones, who used to be in Manfred Mann, obviously, but was one of those bluesers of that kind, and says he could have been the singer of the Rolling Stones if he wanted.
Yeah.
And so I think that must have been such a fascinating time in London, those early 60s. And so a little part of me is a bit regretful that I wasn't around for all of that.
Yeah, I'm the same way. You mentioned Peter Green. I love that early Fleetwood Mac. And even he with John Mayall. He played with John Mayall.
Oh, he's absolutely one of the greats of guitar. There's no question. I mean, he has such a touch. But then, if he was American, if I'd been in California, I probably would have been into I suppose the hippie thing, the high Ashbury stuff, because I loved Janis Joplin as a kid, and I loved Quicksilver and Barry Melton and a few of those.
Yeah.
So that was when guitar playing was something new, wasn't it, really?
Yes, yes, it was. I've always been an Anglophile, though. I've loved the music, the UK music, music from across the pond, as they say. Growing up on that, and especially the post-punk era, and what kind of turned into alternative and music is what I grew up on as well. Well, speaking of that, was there music in the household early on? Either one of your parents used?
Well, there was a piano in the house, but I'm not sure that anybody knew how to play it, so I guess I'd have to say no. I vaguely remember as a child, my oldest brother was in the army, and he was home at one time, and the Beatles were on performing on the TV for the Queen, I think. So I sort of vaguely remember seeing it and him. I don't know if he was all that interested, although he did a bit later on. He went to a concert in London at the Roundhouse with the Doors, and I think it was Jefferson Airplane, actually. So that must have been, presumably, that was the later 60s. Again, I would not have been old enough for anything like that, but
Yeah,
that was probably the nearest connection I ever had.
yeah,
When I
yeah,
was about 12 years old, I heard on the radio there was a guy being interviewed who'd started a record company. And I think it was one of these kind of out and out pop sort of labels. And at that moment, I decided, okay, I want to do that. So I wrote him a letter telling him, here I am, I'm 12 years old, and I want to record for his record label. But I didn't know how to sing, I didn't know how to play an instrument. And of course, I didn't get a reply anyway. So that's that.
Well, during the late 70s, it didn't stop anybody, that DIY, the punk movement, if you didn't have talent, it really didn't
Well, but
stop.
actually, you mentioned being an Anglophile, and I think that's always been the way in England.
Yeah,
You see, you could go way back probably to even the likes of Cliff Richard and the Shadows,
right, right.
and or even earlier, maybe Lonnie Donegan, if you know that name. I guess that generation always refers to him as being a great inspiration.
Yes.
But for that matter, I'm not sure that Elvis knew anything. I was watching a documentary yesterday about him, and other than the fact he was great looking and he soaked up all of the kind of gospel singing from the South, he didn't really know anything about music. So that's almost the history of rock and roll, isn't it?
Yes,
The
yes.
people that the people that knew too much and were classically trained either turned their noses up to rock and roll and pop music, or they just tried to make it too technical by far.
That's right. That happens. You're right. You're right. Well, can you remember one of the first singles or albums that you got
Oh,
yourself?
certainly. The first record I ever bought was I Am the God of Hellfire, and I
Oh,
bring you. And
okay. All right.
I thought that was the most exciting thing I'd ever seen when
Yeah.
that came out.
Right.
And so I definitely bought that, and I bought his first album.
Yeah.
Another album I bought kind of early on was because of the hit Pictures of Matchstick Men.
Oh, Status. Status.
Yeah. And to this day, I still don't understand why they didn't continue in that direction, because if they continued in that direction, they would have been Pink Floyd, really. Because,
Right.
that song is one of the greatest psychedelic songs of that era.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
But instead, they just became a sort of, boogie bar band type thing.
is. Right.
And I mean, they remained incredibly popular in England for a long, long time. But they lost me by that point.
Right, right. Yeah, I liked it earlier. I like that album you mentioned. That's got a lot of great tracks on it. Yeah, see, you guys have well, I say you guys, the UK guys have conditioned me to say status. We say status.
Status quo, right, right, yeah.
But then when I'm talking to some UK guys, they're like, no, it's status, or correct me. But yeah, yeah,
I mentioned earlier about the rock documentaries you can get on YouTube these
yeah,
days.
yeah,
So I often watch a lot of them, and so I'm kind of catching up with stuff from the 60s that either wasn't aware of because I was too young, or you just couldn't see because they didn't show those things on TV. And so there's a lot of bands and their stories that I find very fascinating. And those of them that are still alive today, and some of them still working. Like one of them, I don't, you probably would know the name as you know all the English bands, but Andy Fairweather Low.
oh yes, oh
I've
yeah,
been watching, a few things with him lately, and it's amazing how we
yeah,
knew him when he was young, just as this sort of singer of a pop band. And it
right,
turns out he's a really brilliant guitarist that Eric Clapton and people
right,
use all the time.
right. There's
And there was another band I really liked when I was a kid at school they were called The Move.
oh yes, the move, yeah,
Now, of course, they never made it in America whatsoever, but they had loads of hits in England.
yes.
And so that really takes me back to being very, very young and just finding that exciting. And actually, they were when I see old clips of them now performing.
Yes.
When they had a five-piece lineup, they were very dynamic and exciting. So again, I wish I was old enough to have been to their shows back then.
See, I'm the same way. I picked up on them, later in life, but Roy Wood, yeah, and you
I'll
mentioned,
tell
yeah,
you a funny thing was the very first photo session we had for Classix Nouveaux. When we went in to get ready for our first album, it was Roy Wood was just finishing a session.
was he?
And so by that point, I guess he'd been in Wizard or something was probably his thing. And so he wasn't really very cool anymore. And so I think I just said hello, and it would never have occurred to me to really talk about, the move and all that stuff because when you're just starting off and you're that young, I don't know, maybe I don't know whether it's immaturity or lacking confidence. I mean, today if I ran into him, we'd have a long
Yeah.
conversation for hours, but back then it's just hello, I need to go on with my makeup kind of thing.
Right, right. Yeah, I've had so many times where go to see a band in concert and not brave enough to go talk to them. But most of my friends were like that. No, you can't approach them. That's a musician. Put them on a pedestal kind of. So I started talking to them either before the concert or after. Clan of Zymox. I'm sure you're familiar with the band, right?
No, I never heard
Oh
of
no.
that.
Oh, Clan of they record on 4AD.
Is
Um,
that British?
they are from Holland. They're
Oh,
they're a Dutch band, but they came to Dallas a couple of times, and I talked to the lead singer before the concert. I shook his hand. Then afterwards, we met them like they just came out into the seating area and talked to them. He said, "Oh, you're the guy with the sweaty palms, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, that was me." Whenever I get nervous, I get sweaty
well,
palms.
I mentioned that I like the San Francisco bands of the hippie era. And
Yeah.
then one time, John Cipollina came over to England
Okay.
and he did a tour with this Welsh man. So
Yes.
they're
Yeah.
playing at the Roundhouse. Me and one, maybe two friends who are teenagers from school go, and he comes walking out into the audience. So my friend says apparently I spoke to him, but I can't imagine what I would have said as an idiotic teenager, you know.
Right. Yeah, I've heard those kind of stories and I experienced that myself. Yeah,
A bit later on, actually, Barry Melton was playing in London. I think we did have a little chat with him because he was playing in a very small venue. He was just on his own with one of those tiny little, really tune-up amps, that's only about a foot square.
yes,
And
yes,
so I think we did have a bit of a conversation.
yeah,
And then later on, in my adulthood, once I'd heard that Cipollina had died, and I somehow made a little contact with Barry Melton, and we just had a brief back and forth because I knew they were friends and played together in the Dinosaurs, I think.
yes, yes. Yeah, Roy Wood, going back to him, I've reached out to him. I don't expect him to, hear back, but that would be a nice interview. I wish I could talk to it.
Yeah, yeah. My friend Nick Beggs again, I mentioned, he told me that I can't quite remember. He said Roy had to come down for some kind of gig that he was playing at, and he said he was very sweet, was what he said.
Yeah,
I'm sure he is.
yeah,
But then, of
he,
course, we all mellow as we get older, don't we?
yeah.
Even Johnny Rotten appeared on what's that, The Masked Singer once, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
And it's like, oh, who would believe that he'd be doing that, you know?
Who would have expected that? You're right.
We mellow, yeah, we mellow, or we become more confident or something, or we just don't care. I don't know which one.
It could be a little of both. Well, speaking of concerts, do you recall one of the first concerts you attended that you went to?
Well, I told you about Led Zeppelin, but the best concert
Yeah.
I ever attended was Alice Cooper
Oh,
doing
okay.
Welcome to My Nightmare. I mean, I've seen Queen, I've seen David Bowie,
Yeah.
but Alice Cooper doing Welcome to My Nightmare. I didn't really like his music that much. I liked Schools Out, but I didn't like after that his
Yeah.
solo stuff. But it was just so well done. The scenery and the choreography and everything. So it always stuck in my mind that there was this one scene there was a graveyard scene being projected on the back, and he was dancing with some girls in skeleton suits, and then one of them jumps through the curtain and appears on the screen at that moment, and then the other one does, and then Alice does. So eventually everybody's on the screen dancing, and then they jump right out again.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
thought that was so amazing, to be, because back in those days you didn't have computers and everything.
Right.
So
Right.
to be so timed. So I've always had a great respect for Alice. Funnily enough, I was watching a video of him today talking about Glenn Campbell.
Oh,
And
really?
so I don't know when Glenn Campbell passed, but apparently he had about 10 years of declining with Alzheimer's.
Yes.
And so Alice was a good friend of his, and they used to play golf together.
Oh, I
And
didn't know that. Did not know that. Wow.
yeah, yeah. And Alice said something interesting to me. He said, well, we're both Christians, so he's gone to his reward, and I'll be there one day. So I
Yeah.
thought, okay, that's nice.
My Alice Cooper story, I saw him years after that, probably 3 or 4 years later on a tour. And our tickets just happened to be right behind the mixing board, out in the middle of the audience, right? Well, the usher comes up to us and they said, would you like to move up? Because it's kind of obscured where you're sitting, a few seats. Sure. We got up maybe 5, 6 rows back, I mean, so it was lucky that we were seated behind that, that we got good seats after that. They moved us up. So,
Well, another very good performer I saw who is apparently doing it again these days is Adam Ant.
oh,
And so I was trying to think that we used to have the same manager for a while, and I'm trying to think. Actually, I think we did a gig with him as well when we were just kind of starting off. So we were kind of like a small up and comer, and he was probably just kind of beginning his rise to stardom at that time. So he was dressed as the whole, I don't know what you want to call it, pirate thing. Um, but he was a fantastic performer. I mean, he's never been a good singer, but he was a fantastic performer. Tons of charisma. Every move and every looked appeared like it was choreographed. I'm sure it wasn't, but he just has got that charisma.
yes, he definitely does. Well, other influences for you, musical influences, bands?
Huh. I don't know about that really. See, the thing is, in the 80s, well, I mean, it was, as you mentioned, it was really the late 70s when we were starting off. And having absorbed so much music over our growing years and having a fairly diverse band made it, I guess you could call it a sort of exploration, really, because on the one hand, like our drummer BP, as you know, was from X-Ray Specs, so he was right from the center of the whole punk thing. Um, Mick, our bass player, he was very much a Bowie kid, really. Loved Roxy music as well. And our guitarist, Gary, he was, well, he loved Jimi Hendrix. He actually says he was inspired to start playing guitar by Jimi Hendrix. And I remember the day he came to audition for us, and he had all the gear. I don't know if his parents were very generous or whatever, but he had the Stratocaster and he had all the effects pedals and everything. And so we were very impressed. So it'd be hard to, other than the people I've mentioned already when I was growing up, it'd be hard for me to really say that we were particularly thinking of anything specific. In a way, looking back, I almost wish we had, because the way that music has developed today is that people are very much in a specific genre and they stick to that genre.
Yes, yes,
But back then, you see, you mentioned, I can't remember how you said it, but something about the new romantic thing. Well, there wasn't any new romantic thing when we started. It
yeah,
was only a little bit later. I think I saw a letter in the back of one of the music papers saying there's a new thing in London called New Romantics, and the bands are Ultravox, Japan, and Classix Nouveaux.
yeah, yeah.
So up to that point, we didn't know we were New Romantics.
You didn't know you were,
Yeah.
you
So,
know,
and so when you look back and say, well, what was new romantic music like? Well, I'm not sure that you could really pinpoint exactly what the music was like because it was really more about a look, a
yeah,
style,
yeah,
and a fashion.
yeah. I would
And
almost
again,
go
yeah,
ahead.
again, this is something um, that might be more difficult for Americans to understand because here in the States, things take a long time to take fire.
Yeah,
Maybe a bit less now. There's the internet and everything, but certainly back there, it would take years for bands to come from nothing to being nationally or internationally famous. And so they were not all that much trend orientated.
yeah, yeah,
But in England, things move very, very fast because it's really small. You could fit, I hear you could fit Britain 10 times into Michigan. I don't know how many times into Texas, probably 30 to
right,
40 times into Texas.
right, right.
And so uh, for bands that, for instance, would come from Birmingham, like The Move or like ELO or, Black Sabbath, to go to London, it's only a 2 hours drive. And even Scottish bands, for them to come down to London, well, the furthest you would drive is probably about 6 hours.
Right, right.
Um, and so things just move very fast. So, and the other thing actually I discovered when I came to live in America about the difference is that in England, most people live in cities. See, the population of Britain, at least when I left, was about 55 million, and about 14 million of them would be in London.
Yeah,
And so then once you add on Manchester and Birmingham, Liverpool, Newcastle, and then the major Scottish cities, Glasgow, Edinburgh, there's hardly anybody left.
yeah, yeah.
So there's hardly anybody living in the country. But out here, I realized hardly anybody really lives in cities.
It's the opposite. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And so that makes a big difference because if you live in the cities, then things like dance clubs and fashion boutiques and all that are part of everybody's experience. But if you live in Iowa or maybe
yeah.
in Texas, they're absolutely not whatsoever.
Right, right.
And so that's where you get things like coming back to the new romantic thing because the fashions would spread so quickly. Like one day it's punk, next it's kind of mod, you've got the Jam and people like that. Then it's ska and you've got Madness and the Selector and the Beat. And then before you blink, then suddenly it's electronic music and it's new romantics.
Right.
See, I can
Exactly.
remember just running into Boy George somewhere. He wasn't called Boy then, he was just George.
Mhm.
And he said to me, oh, there's a theatrical place that's closing down in Covent Garden. You should go down there and get some outfits real quick. And so I went and bought, my famous black cape and King and I pants and all of that. And so again, you would just see people around. Another time I ran into him when he was starting to be famous in Carnaby Street, and he said, "Oh, I'm incognito." He wasn't wearing any makeup, and so if you're right in the center where it's all happening, then you just have contact with people. That's all that there is to it.
Yeah, you blink like you said, and it's a new movement, coming through. It's a new, what have you.
Young people in England, including me when I was growing up, are very much wanting to be part of the new thing
Yeah, yeah,
and not the old thing.
yeah.
When I was older, at one time I was driving a bus of teenagers from my church out somewhere for an outing, and I noticed all the music they played was within 6 months old.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So that's how England was. It might be different now because, again, with the internet and Spotify and everything, lots of people are discovering the Beatles and other old music and say, actually, this is maybe better than what what's coming out today.
right,
Um,
right.
and hence even stuff like the Classix Nouveaux stuff. Last
Yeah,
Saturday, I was at a party and one young guy in his 20s came up and he said, "Oh, I discovered your Classix Nouveau." He started showing me one that he said, "I like that." So, and I've been thinking, why would you like it?
yeah.
Um, but again, I guess it's different. It's different. And after a certain period of time, it's authentic because that's the music of that period.
That's right. That's right. Indelibly stamped on that time period. Well, I'm surprised the band wasn't lumped also into goth, because you've got
Yes.
kind of lean
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Well, that's a good thought because you're right. On our first album, in particular, I always remember there was one song that closed the album. It was called "The Protector of Night," and that was long before Bauhaus and all these things. And I sometimes think, if we'd have gone in that direction, you're right, we would have probably been one of the very first goth bands. And definitely, I've always had a soft spot for that kind of feeling. Um, I suppose we had a lot of pressure from the record company to come up with hits because Duran Duran got signed to the same label.
Yeah.
And so right away they were like the teeny hit. And so a lot of people would be that worked in the record label, we were, well, why can't you do what Duran Duran is doing? And I mean, they even gave us the same producer for a session one time. Another time they gave us Tony Visconti,
Yeah.
and those things just didn't work out at all.
Yeah.
So I think we kind of had things pulling us in two different directions, really, which was probably to our detriment. We
Right.
probably
Right.
maybe we should have just ignored them and did what we wanted.
Did what you wanted, right? Right. Well, Sal, I have a copy of Night People on CD, and it's got some extra tracks on there. I want to mention some of my favorites and maybe get your recollections or maybe a story or backstory behind them, if you could. Of course, there's Guilty, still one of my favorites on there. Then there's Inside Outside, which you've remade recently, done a
Mhm.
remake on that. 623 Degrees, another one that I liked.
That's called 623.
623, let's see. Thank you for doing that. You see, I've been saying that all
You
wrong
want,
all
all right,
this.
you want to stop there and give you the stories of
Yes,
each of
yes,
those?
yes, yes, please do. Yes.
Uh, well, the thing about Guilty is it was the first video that ever showed the whole new romantic thing. Because what happened was as we were going around doing our gigs, and people would always show up to our gigs in this amazing regalia. And so our manager would get their phone number or something, say, "Do you want to appear in a video?" So when it was time for a video, we invited them all to come down. So they all came down with their best outfits. And one of them was actually supposed to be George O'Dowd, but who became Boy George.
Yeah.
And we started about 8 o'clock in the morning. He used to live in a squat at the time. I don't know if you know what a squat is, but it's basically a abandoned house. So him and Marilyn and a whole bunch of those people
Oh,
just
Maryland.
yeah just took over the house, I guess. Probably Jeremy was there as well, who became Hazy Fantasy. And so I had to just go and put a note through the door. And so I put a note through the door. Okay, we're making a video tomorrow at this place. Here's the number. So we started about 8 o'clock in the morning, and then around lunchtime, they said, "Somebody's on the phone for you." And so I pick up the phone, it's George. He says, "All right, I'm ready. Shall I come down now?" And I said, "You're too late. We've done it all." You know, he was still sleeping or doing his makeup or something like that.
Yeah.
So had he have made it in time, that would have been his first appearance in a music video. Anyway, then the next thing that happened was we were signed to EMI in London, and so that's Capitol Records here in America. And they had this country singer, Kim Carnes, and whoever was producing her decided they need to try and go new romantic. And so when they saw the video for Guilty, they said, okay, we want that. So they flew out the director, Russell Mulcahy, to pretty much copy the video for Betty and make it for Betty Davis eyes. So the only real difference in the staging was we had curtains flowing around in our one. They didn't have curtains, but other than that, it looks the same.
Yeah.
And of course, Russell Mulcahy went on to become a movie producer and MTV. He did the whole what do they call that? Wolf, Teen Wolf, isn't it? Teen Wolf was
Yeah,
on
Teen Wolf, yeah.
MTV for a while. That was
Michael
him
J.
as well.
Fox, yeah, yeah,
And he
yeah,
also did some great videos with Duran Duran after that.
yeah, yeah,
So that was Guilty. Inside Outside. I think when we decided to do something new and we reviewed all of our old stuff, or I don't know if we even really reviewed it, it just stuck in our mind that that particular one seemed to encapsulate the era better than anything else. It was kind of, in a way, it was sort of new romantic. It was um, even the text, you know, at one time back in the day, I remember an interview, I think it might be in New Jersey, saying to me, "This is very pessimistic, you know, do you really think there's no future," type of thing? And I said, well, it's not necessarily my personal opinion. It really speaks for our generation that, you know, is pessimistic about the future, nothing to look forward to. In a way, it's a continuation of the Sex Pistols' "No Future," I guess.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but by the time we got it onto our album of Battle Cry a few years ago, we finally said, this is the ultimate version of this. This is how we really wanted it to sound. We weren't good enough back in the day to make it sound that way.
yeah.
But today we feel this is it. This is the definitive
Oh,
version. Um, what was the other one? Oh, 623 you mentioned.
63, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that one actually just started as a jam in rehearsal. And I think I had to go out for a while. So the other three guys in the band started jamming away, and Mick, the bass player, he had for a very short stint with Elvis Costello,
Oh, okay.
and at the time he had a song "Watching the Detectives," which was sort of reggae-ish,
Yeah.
and so they started doing this reggae-ish kind of background. Then when I came in and heard it, I had a little portable synth that was brand new at the time. It was called a Wasp. It was a battery synth. So it was really the first synth you could carry around. And so I just started creating on top of their track, and that's how 623 came to be.
And that's how it came. Okay. See, I like to
So,
hear the
yeah.
backstory.
So every one of our gigs, I mean, for us, it was kind of flippant. It was just a bit of messing around. But the fans seemed to love that. They'd have real fun with that. And so every gig, I just pull out the battery synth and walk around and play it. And the other thing was when we played that one live, another thing that came out of that time, and that's one of the things I love about that period was things were brand new. New
Yeah,
instruments were still being invented all the time.
yeah.
So we got these synth drum pads. So most people used to use them, you know, to go woo woo, you know, you can ring
Uh,
my bell, that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah.
But we got the idea you could tune them to notes. So instead of doing that, so we tuned the drum pads to notes. And so when we performed it, instead of playing the hi-hat, BP used to play the synth drum. So it's so that was how we did that. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh, I like to hear those technical.
So which other ones did you want a
Yeah,
story on?
sure. Every home should have one.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, again, that one is kind of connected to the technology that was coming out at that time. And some people today say that was very prophetic because obviously it's all about us being spied upon. And I believe in London today, you cannot go anywhere without being on cameras.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea of where the technology was going. I mean, it wasn't only us. There were people like Landscape and probably others who were very fascinated with all the new inventions, instruments, technology. So every home was really about that. I think I might have actually written that one before Classics came to be, because when I initially I went to audition for X-ray specs because when polystyrene turned into a Hare Krishna or something and denounced punk, initially they wanted to just get a new singer and songwriter. So, and I had had, as you mentioned, this band that went nowhere called The News. We'd had a record company and we'd been in the big studios and everything, but we were dumped unceremoniously very quickly. And so I thought, okay, that's it. I've had it with bands. I'll go and join someone else's. So when I went to the X-Ray Specs interview, I guess they asked me to play two or three of my songs. So I think one of them would have been Every Home Should Have One. Another one would have been that, or a movie. Yeah, or a movie was definitely one. So BP, the drummer, really, really liked my stuff. And that's how we ended up starting Classics.
Okay. Well, another track from the album, which may be my second favorite, Soldier. I like that one.
Soldier is mostly a mix song. And he had this thing, he'd been in a sort of pop type band, you know. I guess um, I mentioned the different influences and how quickly things moved. He was sort of into the what did we call it in those days? Maybe it was called New Wave. It was a bit like what later came to be called Britpop, I suppose. You know, these bands like the Vapors turning Japanese, that kind
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah,
It wasn't really punk. It was sort of pop, punkish pop, let's say. So I think maybe they called it New Wave. So he was kind of doing that before Classics, and so he'd often come up with stuff like that. And so it was a bit more poppy than the typical thing that we would do, and a bit more poppy than my natural style. You know, my natural style probably, as you mentioned, would have been a bit more in the goth direction.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so yeah, that was really it. You know, he would come up with those kind of songs, and then I would write the lyrics. I'm not sure why Soldier was definitely he would have presented that to me, and then I had to make a story out of it, I suppose. But yeah, we used to play it live a lot, and it was very percussive. It was good. It was
yeah,
exciting.
yeah, yeah. Well, my extended CD also has one of my top favorites from the band, the Robot Stance. Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Wow, robots dance.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, that's definitely a signature from the early years of Classics because that used to be yeah, that used to close our show. And so I used to disappear off stage and return in a bodysuit. I mean, thank goodness I was thin enough those days that I didn't mind showing off my entire physique. Um, and we had this great strobe lighting. I mean, used to have a fantastic lighting guy actually throughout the career of Classics. And so it just used to go completely crazy, especially at the end there where I'd be screaming and um, moving around where I guess the robot is overloaded by the end of that.
yeah,
And unfortunately, one time, I think, in fact, we were opening for Ultravox on this occasion. So while I was busy going crazy, I hit my head on the top of the guitar because also the strobe light's going. And so I hit my head on the top of the guitar, Gary's guitar, and I had to go to the ER and get stitches. And I still have a scar from that. But yeah, it was a bit of a showstopper in our early days.
yeah.
There's
Oh,
something about, I mean, definitely that song has a certain appeal to it. It's this weird kind of um, hypnotic sort of thing that it has to it, isn't it?
yes,
Great,
yeah.
great bass line as well, of
Bass,
course.
I was going to say the bass is what gets you on that one. Yeah,
Yeah.
I used to,
Even the guitar, the guitar line's so very restrained.
right, right.
And so it's another of those things. If we'd have maybe gone in more of a gothic sort of direction, we might have done more like that. And that would have been appealing because it was original and there's a lot to explore there.
Very much so, yeah. I used to DJ at a club in San Antonio in the it was 86 dance club, and I used to play that one quite frequently, Robots Dance. And they would get out on the floor. Yeah, they would pack it. They liked it. Well, one
Yeah,
more.
we one of the things of that era was, of course, 12-inch singles came out.
Right, right.
So I don't know if people today know what that is, but basically it's extended versions, extended mixes. That was something new. But because there was no computers, the way that had to be done back then was once you'd finished the radio mix, then you literally had to chop up the tape and you'd play, you'd find little instrumental bits and stuff that you liked in the song, and eventually it's all glued together. And so a lot of the clubs, they used to play those extended versions. And so when we were on tour in different countries, usually when we'd finished our shows, we'd go to a club and we'd hear all of those versions of all the current bands at that time.
Yeah, yeah. A couple of other tracks from that. They were additional tracks. Old World for Sale is another one that I liked. And then 627. Hope I said that one right, not 627, right?
You
62.
said it right. Old World for Sale, I kind of remember how it goes, but I don't really remember much about it. Um, I'll have to investigate it when we finish our conversation and see what was going on in there. 627, we used the numbering system like after 623, every time we did another instrumental, which was usually at least every album and sometimes B-sides, we just give it another number. So I'm not quite sure which one is 627, but I have a feeling it's the one that actually had a Casio doing the main melody because I mentioned the Wasp synth. So the Wasp synth was about the size of a current day MacBook, let's say. Um, so then Casio came out with a calculator that was a keyboard, had a keyboard on it. So it was about probably just 12 inches long and maybe just 3 inches wide. So the minute I see something like that, so wow, this is great. I could really carry this about on stage, because I didn't want to be a keyboard player stuck behind a bank of keyboards.
Yeah, all right.
And so I think 627 was the one that I started on there. And so a couple of things about that would be the place that I lived in London. London has a great underground system. They call it the Tube. And
Yeah,
so you can go anywhere on the underground. So normally, to go to the studio or to go to the record company in it was probably 20 minutes on the tube or something from my house to there. So in that time, I'd be writing songs. And so maybe I had my Casio with me or in my head, I'm just coming up with the melodies. See, another one like that would be, Is It a Dream?
yeah,
Where by the time I got to the studio in my head, I had the melody.
yeah,
And so, yeah, there's a lot to be said for the tube. At a later point in my life, I used to, when I was doing radio in a place called Victoria in London, which is near where Buckingham Palace is. Well, it's where Buckingham Palace is. So at that time, I used to get a bus to the radio station I was working at. That was a 30-minute bus ride. So I used to go up the top of the bus, double-decker bus, and then you can see all the tops of the buildings and that gives you a completely different perspective on London, just seeing the upper parts of the buildings.
yeah, yeah,
But again, it's very inspirational. Traveling around London was kind of good in those days.
yeah, yeah. Well, you just mentioned "Is It a Dream?" Another favorite of mine. Was that the band's biggest hit? "Is It a Dream?"
Well, in England, it certainly was,
Yeah,
um, because in England, essentially, there were I think there was only three national TV channels at that time. And so for something to become a hit, you needed to appear on one of the big national shows. So normally that was Top of the Pops on probably a Thursday or something like that. But there was also at the time a thing kind of similar to Saturday Night Live. I, I don't, I'm not sure what it was called, but anyway, it was just this new show that was just on for a very short period of time, and it was really, really happening. Everybody was just crazy about that show. And because it was supposed to be live, and normally TV shows are miming,
Yeah.
so they had wanted, strangely enough, Slade,
Oh,
who,
right.
Slade was like the biggest British band
Yeah.
of the 70s.
Yeah.
But
Did you
they,
happen to see my interview with Don Powell, the drummer?
oh, I didn't actually
Okay.
know.
Okay.
But
Go ahead.
yeah. But apparently Slade didn't want to perform live, or Noddy didn't want to sing live or something. So we said, we'll do it. And so we went on and did Is It a Dream live. And so this would have been the very first time that the vast majority of the British public had ever seen this act. And so seeing, this bald-headed creepy dude screaming his head off made such an impression that the next week it was in the top 40.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was why that one took off. But in other countries, we had different ones. Portugal, we got gold discs for Never Again, The Day's Time Erased. In Poland, our biggest song was Never Never Comes.
That's my next. That's the one I was going to mention. That's one of my favorites. That's one of my favorites right there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we even had the
Yeah.
like number one songs in countries that we never thought about. We arrived in Israel and we were told we were number one. In Iceland, we were number one.
All right.
So,
It's
the whole
It's wild
international thing.
when you find out what countries that you're real popular in. It's really wild,
Well,
Uh,
there's also different reasons why you become popular in various places.
yeah.
See, in Yugoslavia, as it was then, I mean, today I guess it's Bosnia and different countries like that, but that was the first time we did a stadium show. And so they decided, I guess it wasn't quite communist, but it was something weird like that. They'd had a dictator and they decided they want to ease up for the kids or something. So they came to EMI and said, who's available to come out to Yugoslavia? And they said, well, Classix Nouveaux and the Gang of Four. So one night was Classix Nouveaux, one was the Gang of Four. And so, we did our usual show in a big stadium. And next thing, we had a silver disc in Yugoslavia. And Poland was big because at that time it was communist. And again, I think we were one of the first bands to go out there. And suddenly we were the biggest thing going. We were the biggest international band there. And that carried on for a long time. And even to this day, if you meet Polish people from that generation, they'll probably say Classix Nouveaux, never, never comes. They'll
Yeah.
also say San Damiano from me as well.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. The only criticism for Never Never Comes, I wish it was longer. I think the song's too short. One of those that,
I think there was an extended version in
oh, okay.
existence.
I haven't heard that one. Okay.
Hmm.
Right. Well, you mentioned earlier talking about the 12 inches. Um, I still have my copy. I wanted to show you of this one.
That's Forever and a Day, is it?
Yes, Forever and a Day. The first song I ever heard from the band. So I caught on to you guys towards the end,
Mm,
83, I believe. And there's the backside of it too. Yeah.
yeah.
So I still have my 12-inch here. And I used to play that in the clubs as well. But
Well, that one, we have certain fond memories of that one because it was the first and actually only time I think for Classix Nouveau we had a real orchestra on one of our songs, and so Anne Dudley, who went on to do Art of Noise and Titanic and all that,
yeah.
so she brought the guys into the studio. And the engineer for that album was Phil Thornelly, who went on to be with The Cure and, wrote what's that? Torn, isn't it? By Nally Imbruglia was his.
Oh, yes, 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 yes.
At the time, he was 19 and he was a brilliant, brilliant engineer. He's just one of these geniuses. And he just seemed to know exactly where to put the mics for each instrument or section. It was in Mickey Mo's studio rack, and Kim Wilde was actually in the other studio at that time. I remember we had a chat, and we just couldn't believe it when we had a real orchestra playing one of our songs. And the way that Anne Dudley arranged it was great too, because it's got that dramatic kind of, I love Tchaikovsky's music, and it's got that
Yes,
great sort of, 19th century romantic feel to the strings. And so
yes,
that had a big influence me in later times, because I went on to, my first solo album, I had some real strings as well. And often since then, I mean, the most recent Classix Nouveaux album actually ends with some orchestration and stuff.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
so that was
how did you get the whip in that song? The whip.
well, our producer for that session, Alex Sadkin, his big hits of that moment were with the Thompson Twins.
Okay.
And so the Thompson Twins didn't really play anything. They were just singers. So one of the session musicians that he used for the Thompsons, an American, he brought over to London for the sessions. And so we would all the time be looking for new sounds. And the other thing with that album was there was a new instrument that came out that time. I mentioned earlier how we really enjoyed everything that was new inventions, new sounds. And we really, really were hoping that every time we had a new album, there would be sounds that you hadn't heard before. So the new thing at that moment was the Fairlight. So
Yeah.
Fairlight was a huge sampling instrument. Um, it was really, really expensive. So very few people had them. Peter Gabriel had one. Trevor Horn had one. And we found another guy who had one. I don't remember his name, but he was like a weird, nutty science professor. He'd actually made an album, he told us, called White Noise. Presumably, it was an early synthesizer album, and he said it was in the charts for many, many years. Anyway, used to have floppy disks of sounds to put into it. So we said to him, um, we'll play your song, and we want you to come up with a sound, for this particular song. So we were expecting some new, amazing sound that you'd never heard. And he'd listen to a song and he'd say, "Oh, I hear wood." So next thing he puts in a floppy disk, and literally it's the sound of people banging on wood. It wasn't a new sound. It was like a building site or something like that. So I think that was, I mean, we did do one song on that album actually, which really was all these kind of building site noises on a long percussive intro. But I think that's probably where the whip came from.
Oh, okay. I wondered about that. Well, that's interesting. You mentioned Ann Dudley. I talked to her brother. Do you know who her brother is?
I don't
Bobby Valentino. Does that name ring a bell?
know.
How about Fabulous Poodles?
Oh, he was in that, was he?
Yeah, he was in that band. Yeah.
Well,
The
when she did Art of Noise
yeah.
with Gary, what's the last name now? He was a fantastic engineer, and so I did some sessions with him after that. Yeah, that was just before they started Art of Noise. And who was the other? I forget who was. There was about three of them involved in that. Maybe it was somebody from Landscape or something. Um, but again, they made some great tracks ahead of their time because they were just so good. Each one of them was really, really good at what they did.
Yeah.
And Dudley, the arranger, Gary, the engineer, got fantastic sound.
And Trevor Horn. Yeah. Yeah. Just I talked to who was it that I talked to? He worked with Trevor Horn. Oh, Bruce Woolley. Bruce Woolley.
Oh yeah.
The Camera Club. And he worked with Trevor. Actually, he recorded "Video Killed the Radio Star" before the Buggles. Bruce did, and of course it flopped. It didn't do as well as the Buggles version. But with the Camera
Bruce
Club,
Woolley recorded that.
yeah, yes he did, yes he did.
Hmm.
Right with the Camera Club. So he worked with Trevor. So that was
Yeah, yeah.
I was
You just reminded me actually of a few sort of 70s things that I really liked. So Video Killed the Radio Star was a great one. Tom Tom Club, was great. I had that album, Wordy Rapping Hood and all that stuff. And then what was, oh yeah, pop music, pop music,
yes,
pop,
yes, yeah,
pop.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Well,
I guess I always liked, when you talk about influences,
yes,
um, I guess they're coming back to me now. That I always liked things that were kind of eccentric, really. I mentioned to you my first record I bought as a kid was Fire by Arthur Brown. And then later on, the first hit by Roxy Music, Virginia Plain. I never really liked them after that.
Right.
What's her
Right.
name? Virginia Plain. It was like
Yeah.
great, never heard anything like that before. Another one was Sparks. It's only
Oh,
big enough for the both of us.
yes.
Like
Yes.
fantastic. And funnily enough, the bass player on that was a guy that was at school with me, Martin Gordon. He went on to be with Radio Stars and some of those Jet and some of
Oh,
those groups. But that was great. The first Sparks album. Again, I never really liked them after that, but
yeah.
Kimono My House was a great
Yeah.
album.
Kimono My House.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. They had to go to the UK to make it. They didn't get a second look over here. They had to.
Yeah, you're right, actually, because I think probably even to this day, I know they're still out performing in that, and it looks like they do a lot better in other countries.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
America's too big, and they're probably too eccentric, really.
they are for our
But
taste. Yeah.
yeah, but definitely, if I mean another one actually, just probably just before Classic started was Lena Lovitch.
Oh, right.
What was
Right.
it? Lucky Number was the hit that she had, the big hit.
Right.
You go, "Ee-hoo, ee-hoo,"
Yeah, she did.
So.
I always like Blue Hotel. That's what
So
one.
I remember going to a gig actually of hers, and I think in my mind I had the idea that I wanted to be a male version of her,
Yeah, yeah.
and so that's probably how I ended up doing all the screaming and stuff live. It was like Reagan just singing a song like the normal way was not going to do it for me.
All the fluctuations in that. Well, talk a little bit about Rockets, how you came to join.
Right. Well, just before Classics, when I was in this period I mentioned to you, I'd done the news and I was disillusioned with that. So it's like, okay, I'm looking for something different to do that I don't have to star. So at the time, music papers were real big in England. In particular, Melody Maker was one where it had pages and pages of classified advertisements at the back. So some of them would be people selling gear, and a lot of them were bands looking for members. So the whole history of music is full of people that found their bands or found their members
Yes.
from Melody Maker.
Right. I've talked to many. Yes.
Yeah. So I saw this. So this was probably around 1979. So I saw a advertisements and it said Italian band, big, or it said something like big Italian band looking for a singer. Interesting applicants will be brought over to Italy, expenses paid. So I didn't really want to join a band in Italy, but I thought, well, expenses paid. I've never been to Italy. So
Right.
I applied and they liked whatever I sent them,
Sign me up. Yeah.
Yeah, they liked what I sent them. And so when I went to the record company, they were saying, of course, we have the Rockets, expecting a reaction. And there was no reaction because I'd never heard of them. And everywhere there was these cutouts and whatever. So this particular record company had the two biggest bands in Italy. So the number one band was called The Pooh, unfortunately.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, they thought Winnie the Pooh, I'm sure, but
Right. Right.
inevitably,
A progressive rock band.
yeah, we might think of something else,
Yeah. Right. Yes.
Anyway, number one was the Pooh, and number two was Rockets.
Rockets.
Um, as it happened, they when they heard my stuff, they wanted to sign me up as a solo artist rather than join a band. And they offered me a contract and everything. But again, I just didn't want to join a band in Italy. I wanted, to be with a band in England. And when Classic started, actually, they did come over and look at us and make an offer again for the band. Anyway, I took home, I guess Rockets had maybe three or four albums by that point, and they were huge. They really were huge in Italy. Everybody knew them, a household name. And their music was actually quite cool. It was particularly at the time. I mean, even today, you would say, well, that was actually really rather good, ahead of its time, because most of the vocals were a vocoder, and it's sort of like a cross between Kraftwerk and Pink Floyd. So it's very robotic electronic music, but with real instruments. So they've got a real drummer and they've got a real guitarist. So I kind of remained friends with them for well, to this day, actually, to be honest. And so I think by about 19, maybe it was 84, they felt that they'd got as big as they could be in Italy, and so they wanted to try their luck at spreading out. So they asked me if I would sing some songs with them. So I went back to Italy and recorded a couple of songs. One of them got into the top 20 in Italy. And then I did a tour with them for about a month in Italy. And so that was fantastic. You know, you imagine being in a great Italian restaurant for lunch and dinner every day of the
Yeah.
week. And it was a great experience. A bit later on, then they tried another album where they came to London and they used an English producer and some English session musicians, backing singers, and that. And it was a good album, but it didn't do anything. And even after that, they did another album in Paris where this time it was really kind of mostly remakes of their old stuff. And they were trying to involve again international people. So they had somebody from Funkadelic was over there participating. They asked me to get Nick Beggs in on the scene, and they were with a new record label at that time. I think that maybe that one was with Polydor or something. But again, that didn't really do anything, that album. So that was the last time I recorded with them. Um, but as I said, we've stayed in touch since then and exchanged a few things. Just the other day, the only remaining original member was asking me for some advice on a collaboration he wants to do with a British artist. But when I listen to their stuff now, I think, well, it's really good. I didn't appreciate it so much at the time because, for those who don't know, they were essentially the Kiss of Italy. And so instead of painting their faces black and white, they used to shave their heads like me and paint themselves all silver and dress in space outfits.
Yeah.
So I guess you'd say they were also a bit Devo. They were sort of
Yeah.
Kiss and Devo for
Right.
for
Right.
Italy.
Yeah. Speaking of
Uh,
that, painting your faces, I talked to one of the very few non-UK, non-American, non-Canadian artists from Brazil, Secos Molhados. Does that name ring a bell? That was kind of a progressive band in the late 60s, early 70s, and they used to do that too. And I talked to one of their members.
really, the only foreign artist that I'm aware of who might have, been in that scene would have been Klaus Nomi.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And again, he was probably, a little bit too much out there.
What took you to on the pilgrimage to San Damiano?
Well, um, I guess, we talked a lot about the music when we were kids and the influences from the 60s and all that kind of stuff. And my letter to a record company when I was 12 years old. So from 12, I always thought I want to be a rock star and then I'll be happy. That's my role in life. And by the time I didn't really find it all that rewarding. Um, I mean, it's a common story, I suppose, that people either they just get hooked on the drugs and the lifestyle and everything and destroy themselves, or they go looking for something more deep. And so I was looking for something more deep. And so when I made this trip to Italy to San Damiano, I found it. And so initially, I thought I'm going to have to give up rock music, thinking it was all very evil, oh, the devil, and that kind of thing. And there was a particular pilgrim in that place I noticed, a young guy who, he just looked really angelic. He'd be praying, and he looked like he was really communing with heaven. And I thought, I want some of that.
Yeah.
So one day I spoke to him, and he said he'd been a Buddhist and he'd been a Hindu, and now he discovered what he was really looking for. And then he said, "What do you do?" And I was there with Nick Beggs, who at the time used to have beads coming out of his neck and pom pom hairdo. And I thought, this is a bit embarrassing, say, I'm from this evil rock and roll business.
All right.
And he said, "Oh, I can see why God called you, because young people listen to music. You found what we're looking for, what they're looking for. And so you can use music to tell them." So when I got home, I wrote the song San Damiano, and a year later it became a big hit. And
Yeah.
so that somewhat changed my direction, really.
Yeah. Well, there's that Poland connection again because it went to number one in Poland. Yeah.
Well, by the time we got to Poland, actually, I was yeah, I was probably on our first tour of Poland when I started feeling that I was looking for something more because the whole Polish thing was so crazy. You know, we'd be playing stadiums with 10,000 people. There'd be 2,000 people outside who couldn't get in, looking through the windows. Just complete. It was like Beatlemania. The first time we arrived, we expected to be unknown when we go to a new country for the first time. And when we arrive at the airport, there's hundreds of kids screaming and holding our posters and all this kind of thing. It was just like Beatlemania. And the reason was because it was still communist then. So if the Communist Party decided they were going to do something, they owned the radio station, they owned the magazines, so they're certainly going to promote it. So everybody in Poland knew about us and our songs long before we set foot. And it's a bit kind of scary, really, because you cannot walk anywhere, you know, without being full, you know, people running after you and screaming, people getting in your face, you know, marriage proposals from people I've never even met in my life. And so I think that kind of got me thinking, this is not really what I signed up for. You know, I
Right.
signed up for, I like music, you know, I
Yeah.
wanted to make music. I didn't kind of want a crazy lifestyle.
Right.
Um, so definitely after like a 2 hour concert and a 20-minute encore, I'm in my hotel room and one day I said, God, if you're really there, I want to know. And so probably by the time we got back to Poland for our next big tour, I already knew the answer to that.
He had already spoken to you. Yes.
Well, the fact that you see, I'd been brought up as a Catholic, and so Poland was such a Catholic country at the time. So I guess they sort of felt that we had something in common. So there was that aspect. Maybe that's a special connection, but also as I told you, we were the first sort of big Western band to go there at that time, and so for them it was just very, very special that they could enjoy a little bit of what Western teenagers were enjoying. And so once I came back as a practicing Catholic, it was kind of icing on the cake for most of them. And to this day, probably you'd find the same thing that a lot of Polish people, maybe your sort of age or a little bit younger, um, they've got their faith and they've got their music, and their music includes Classix Nouveaux and plus San Damiano and the stuff I did later.
Right. Well, how did you become active in youth ministry, the Catholic Church in the UK?
Hmm, there's a question. How did I? I suppose because I was expert, as it were, in contemporary music, having been in that scene, and that appeals to young people. That must have been really how I got into it. I suppose maybe I thought that the church can easily seem boring for young people, and particularly the whole music thing. Um, that guy, as I mentioned in San Damiano, said to me, you know, I can see why God called you. You can do music and use music to tell them." Because it wasn't just young people. When I had the San Damiano song, the record company, even before it was released, I would find people that worked for the record company coming to me and telling me their problems. I don't know why. I was only 20 something, you know, I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
But so, you know, it kind of touched a chord of that when you got the San Damiano song, for those who don't know, it's got this heavenly choir on it, this heavenly boys choir. So a lot of people, it would really touch a chord. It's like we're hearing a little bit of heaven here, so we need to go and talk to the person that created it.
Yeah. Right.
In fact, even the choir master who did the arrangement for them, he ended up becoming a Catholic, and he said he became a Catholic because of me.
Is that right?
So
Wow.
I
Yeah.
don't really know what aspect of me it was that convinced him, but anyway. Um, so yeah, I guess I did use music to tell them, and at some point I thought, well, if I can write songs that are good enough to get into the charts, then I guess I can write songs like that for God as well. And so that's what I started doing then, and I'm still doing to this day.
Yeah. Well, you were still active musically and would record and release albums of Christian music on world records as well as a few independent releases. Uh, what led to the move to the US in what, 99, 1999?
Well, at that time, I was pretty much performing as a Christian artist. And in England, there are not too many, or not just England, but probably Europe in general, there are not too many opportunities there for that kind of thing. At the time when I left England, which is 26 years ago, practicing Christians in England were only about 8%.
Hmm.
And so if 92% of the population is not interested, you don't have a lot of places to go, really. But I would come over here to the States and I would do tours and that throughout the whole country. And so if I was not going to give up performing altogether, it seemed like the only logical thing to do really was to just to be in the place where they want to hear that stuff. So that was pretty much how it happened. I had made some contacts in Chicago, and so I decided to try Chicago for a few years and see how it was. And once I'd done that for a couple of years, I decided I wanted to stay.
And you live where now?
I'm in Florida now. Um,
Okay, okay,
after 15 years in Chicago, I was just fed up with being cold. And
okay.
so I decided, okay, I really love Florida, and so I'm just going to go to Florida and be warm, and that was it. I had no other aspirations beyond that. But
Right. I've talked to a couple of guys recently, UK musicians that relocated.
yeah,
One to San Francisco because of the weather. He said, I was tired of the rain and the cold in the
that's
UK.
right.
And the other guy is in South Africa. So he said the same thing, the same story. He couldn't put up with
Well,
the
yeah,
rain.
yeah. Well, I know that Mike Score from the Seagulls lives in Florida,
He does.
and
Does he still have a diner? Diner?
I really don't know. Gary from Classix, he was with Seagulls for a bit. I
Yeah.
don't know if he's still in touch with them. I mean, occasionally it sort of comes up, and Seagulls used to open for us quite often at places like the Marquee, in
Yeah.
London.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
oh yeah, also I saw a thing recently about a reunion of Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and one of them is living in Florida as well.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely very appealing to
Yeah.
people from the gray rain.
You'd be surprised how many have relocated over here. Yes. Well, as mentioned in the intro, 2021 40th anniversary remake of Inside Outside. And you're pretty pleased with how that turned out.
Well, not the remake. I think that was awful.
Oh, you
Uh,
didn't like the remake. Okay.
no, but the version that's on the album, which is completely different, uh,
Okay.
that version is great. You see,
Uh,
with the 2021 thing, we
yeah.
were not planning to come back really. It was just that this weird phenomenon had arisen where there's all these Facebook fan pages. And so once it came to our attention, and they're posting every day on the fan pages, and we were a little bit sort of humbled by it, really. It's like, wow, these people, they really care about what we did these many years later. And so one day we just decided to surprise them by doing something. But again, I say we weren't planning to come back. We hadn't really invested or put a lot of thought into what a Classix Nouveaux would be like in the 2020s.
Yeah.
And so the version that we did, it was sort of like a comeback, but it was not good. It wasn't well done. So I'm surprised. I mean, I suppose people that took an interest in it only did because it was after so long, but we would hope that once we had the album, like a year or so later,
Yeah.
then they would appreciate the good stuff that we
Oh, the
did
good
later
stuff.
on.
How do you feel about Fix Your Eyes Up? How do you feel about that one?
Well, Fix Your Eyes Up is very interesting because it's that sort of poppy classics thing again. And people have told me it's very uplifting. I've seen fans posting that every time I hear it, I really feel uplifted by that, which is what I intended, the whole idea, fix your eyes up. And the message of the album really coming back after so long was that, in a way, when we were young and doing this, we never imagined there'd be rock and roll music in your old age. But now
Right.
that there is, we've still got life in us yet.
Right.
That's why it's called Battle Cry. We're not coming back on walkers and things like that. We're coming back fighting.
Yes, yes. And the background behind you, the cover. Yes, I like that. Well, yeah, we issued on Cherry Red. That's my go-to label, Cherry Red. I get so
Oh,
much
really?
material from that label. Yeah, a lot of
Well, they bought a whole chunk of EMI, I believe. And so it's like they've got half of EMI's back catalog.
yeah,
And so pretty much anybody you like from previous years, you're going to find with Cherry Red.
yeah, they do. They release a lot of various artist compilations and things like that. I'll pick up on. That's how I
Well,
find.
our old albums, that they put together, that you
Yeah,
mentioned, the various compilation that seem to have done pretty well.
yeah,
And so they've always got an idea for, I guess they dig out all the old B-sides and things like you mentioned.
yeah. Well, I have to ask you this. What are your feelings on Pope Leo, the new Pope?
Well, it's nice to have an American Pope who can actually speak our language.
Yeah.
And so I've seen some historical footage that Pope Pius XII, who was in the 1950s, that he could speak English. But to actually have one speaking plain English now, that's kind of good. I mean, he seems the part, he looks very, I guess you'd say, holy. He doesn't really do anything too outrageous, but the jury's out really about whether he's going to do anything good or anything bad. It's too early. I wrote a song for him actually within a couple of weeks after he was elected, and made a little video of it as well.
Oh, did you? Okay.
I did it with AI, and yeah, I really don't know. I mean, I'm waiting to see. I hear people saying negative things. I mean, generally speaking, people love the Polish Pope, John Paul II, and people didn't like Pope Francis. The kind of people who do Catholic stuff online anyway are very anti-Pope Francis.
Yeah.
And so whether Leo turns out to be more one or the other, we'll have to wait and see.
Okay. Jury's still out on that.
Anyway,
Okay.
I mean, realistically, I
Yeah.
don't care that much because, I'm not a Christian because of who the Pope is. I'm a Christian because of who Jesus is.
Right. Right. I just thought you might have some input or a take on that. Okay. All right. All right then, Sal. Anything in closing that we might have omitted or you'd like to mention or bring up or plug or anything?
Well, it's probably been almost 2 years since I did one of these interviews.
Okay.
And so, therefore, in promoting it, you're welcome to. I mean, if you post it on the Classics fan page and that's say the first interview for 2 years, they'll all get excited about that.
Okay. All right then. Well, I want to thank you for your time, Sal, and for recalling your musical journey, as it were, and your life's journey, as well. So it's been very enjoyable. Again, going back in that time machine with me. Thank you for doing that, and I want to say all the best to you.
Thanks. Have fun,
Sure.
and I wish you many great interviews to come.
All the best, and let me know. Keep me posted if you don't mind on any up and coming developments or anything like that. Any new tracks or you know what have you. You know.
All right. Have
All
a
right.
good day.
All right. You too,
Bye
Sal.
now.